an updated classified intel report saying that the U.S. Department of Energy has assessed that the source of the COVID-19 pandemic likely came from a China lab leak. But there is one major caveat. Sources at the Department of Energy tell CNN that the report has, quote, low confidence.
So that's CNN reporting on a Washington Post story that the Energy Department is assessing that it looks like the COVID-19 virus came from a lab and leaked out of a lab. So that's some of the latest over the past weekend when you've got the Wall Street Journal making this announcement on their headline, lab leak most likely origin of COVID-19 pandemic. Energy Department now says the lead of that story, the U.S. Energy Department has concluded that the COVID-19 pandemic most likely arose from a laboratory leak, according to classified intelligence reports recently provided to the White House and key members of Congress. So what's going on here? You've got the report from the Energy Department and the reaction from others within the Biden administration, in particular, Jake Sullivan. He is an advisor to the president. He essentially says that the likelihood of the leak lacks some detail and lacks a definitive answer, either yes or no, whether or not the COVID-19 virus came from a lab. So we heard about this, and it was really, I think, something that highlights how information is being handled and disseminated by media that are also, getting a lot of money from advertisers like Pfizer and other pharmaceutical companies, how they handle certain questions that came up during the early part of COVID-19 and throughout most of the pandemic. And you got to just kind of reflect back on to where we've come from, right? I mean, 2019, it looked like things were on a path to be a great 2020. The economy was fantastic. You had a 2020 presidential election coming up with, a lot of people seeing that, Donald Trump's economy is doing all right. He's handling foreign affairs without creating new wars. But you had the establishment press and the establishment Democrats and establishment Republicans full court press against Donald Trump in every aspect. They impeached him once, right at the beginning of COVID-19 when it really started to become a problem, and then later on impeaching him again after a whole host of events. But, 2019 was looking all right, and then 2020 happens, and even here locally we had a lot of mixed messages, if you recall. I remember going to news conferences in the early part of 2020 where then Illinois Department of Public Health Director Dr. Ngozi Ezike and Governor J.B. Pritzker were holding news conferences saying, hey, the COVID-19 pandemic, it's not a threat to the general public. I think they said that at least at 2 or 3 different news conferences, if my memory's correct. And then it seemed to just flip on a dime where the governor goes on CNN and talks about how we need to keep people from going to restaurants and that he was strongly thinking about locking the state down. And then all of a sudden it comes out that mid-March, the governor announcing a stay-at-home order after announcing that restaurants needed to close. That led into ending in-person education. That led to a flood of hospitalizations. That led to a battle over whether or not the government was going to manufacture more ventilators to put people on ventilators. And then you started getting questions being raised about, well, how much are hospitals getting paid for these COVID patients? If they are listed as COVID, they get tens of thousands of dollars more in government subsidies. So those were raising some questions. And then you had people speculating about different types of treatments. And then those different types of treatments were censored online. You guys remember all of this, right? I mean, it's 2.5, 3 years ago now. But you remember all of this playing out. And even the issue of whether or not COVID-19 came from a lab, that was brought up and censored. And you have it not just being lambasted as, quote, racist to raise that prospect that it leaked out of a Chinese lab. But you also had, a bunch of former intelligence individuals pushing back on that idea and saying that was not the case. And Then all of a sudden you have, after censorship on social media like Facebook and even on YouTube, who knows if this video is going to survive, but you have censorship happening with big tech on these issues, from the treatments, from various questions, to the speculation that this was developed and leaked out of a Chinese lab. But now you've got the headline that the Washington Post is reporting the Wall Street Journal is reporting that a lab leak most likely origin of COVID-19, according to the Energy Department, and sources there saying that. A lot of reaction to that. Would love to hear your thoughts as well. You can always call in live and local at 217-629-7970. Again, 217-629-7970. Let's go ahead and head to the phones, see what's on your mind. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Good morning. Nobody has a problem calling it the China spy balloon, but when you called it the China virus, everybody threw a fit.
And that seemed to be where a lot of the pushback was, as calling it racist, to point out that the virus originated from China. And if you said it was leaked out of a Chinese lab, then it was labeled racist. And that seemed to be the impetus behind censoring those questions. But then it was a complete flip again. A lot of tugging and pulling here when it comes to the COVID-19 situation. Social media companies like Facebook, they reversed course and said, no, now you can talk about whether or not this was a lab leak. So interesting to kind of see that. Stepping back now, 3 years later, and looking back and saying, what an incredible series of events. And people lost their lives. There's no question people lost their lives. And the education space took a huge negative burden. Kids, the emotional, the psychological, the educational problems that have arisen in the past 3 years, complicated even more by people screaming at each other whether or not they're wearing masks, keeping kids home from school for being suspected of being around COVID. Then you get into all the vaccine mandates and how that divided people even further. Vaccine mandates for certain healthcare workers, vaccine mandates to even go to a concert. There were vaccine passports. But now we also know that the vaccines weren't necessarily as effective as they were sold to us as they were sold. A lot of questions raised on all of these issues. But here we are 3 years later. Good morning. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, I don't care what the hell the screwballs on the left call things. It's mainly just nonsense. But the fact of the matter is I think, especially when it comes to the leftists in this country, they want to control, and that's the root problem of everything. This was just a test to see how they could control Americans.
Well, and it looks that at least a lot of people fell right into believing authority. But I think one of the things that you can step back and realize is that authority doesn't always get it right. And that seems to be more and more evident with the COVID pandemic. I'll take one last call here before the break. Good morning. You're on WMAY. Go ahead. You're on the air. Going once. We'll try this line. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
Oh, how you doing, Greg? The only reason it was deemed as a racist statement is because it was Donald Trump's, came from him, and it was just to demonize him and any of his supporters. And now that's basically, that's as simple as that.
We saw the mountain of pushback that Trump got, again, getting impeached at the beginning, latter part of 2019 into 2020, while the COVID pandemic seemed to be brewing and getting ready to spill over into the United States. And then we get the past 3 years now being pretty fresh history. One last call, I promise. And then we'll get back and hear what Woody Harrelson had to say at Saturday Night Live, and some of the corporate media pushback against Woody Harrelson, for crying out loud. Good morning. You're on WMAY.
It was proven the leak happened from Randy Marsh and a bat and a pantalone and Mickey Mouse.
God, that was so stupid. That was so stupid. That I tell you, again, South Park. A pangolin. That was one of the theories that was out there. Yeah, a pangolin. And just ridiculous. If you guys haven't seen the South Park episode about that, we'll just leave it there. Go watch it. South Park's incredible. One of my favorite shows of all time. We'll actually talk about South Park at some point a little bit later on. They're interesting in some interesting waters when it comes to streaming services and all that jazz. So we'll touch on that. But hey, coming back, let's talk about Woody Harrelson with Saturday Night Live and get your thoughts. Harrelson, good morning. Back at it is Springfield's Morning News. Woody Harrelson making those comments on social media on Saturday Night Live. It's a little bit different than social media. However, I don't know if Saturday Night Live has as large of an audience as it used to. But regardless, Woody Harrelson making these comments, and just to kind of give you a little bit more of that, he essentially opened up his monologue on Saturday Night Live talking about how he hosted the show back in November of 2019. And then, what happened in 2020, everybody knows. And he goes into how, he considers himself a purple individual because he's from Texas. He likes guns. He wants them to be squirt guns, though. And again, he's a Texan. He's a redneck hippie and so on. But Harrelson laying out there his various political ideas, and then eventually gets to the joke where after a Saturday Night Live hosting session in 2019, he gets a script and he's smoking a joint in New York, leans up against a tree and reads the script. And again, he lays out what the script was, and the script was something that he says is just completely unbelievable. Here's Woody Harrelson again.
Okay, so the movie goes like this. The biggest drug cartels in the world get together and buy up all the media and all the politicians and force all the people in the world to stay locked in their homes. And people can only come out if they take the cartel's drugs and keep taking them over and over. I threw the script away. I mean, who is going to believe that crazy idea?
So he doesn't really get too much of a laugh. A lot of buildup for that joke. He got the joke out, but the audience didn't really laugh that much. And I don't know if that's just because of that audience, but it's definitely making the waves. You've got all kinds of headlines here. Woody Harrelson spreads anti-vax conspiracies during SNL monologue. It's from Rolling Stone. And then you look at it, just kind of everybody got their talking points, apparently. I don't know. Woody Harrelson spews anti-vax conspiracies on rambling SNL monologue. I'll agree, it was definitely rambling. Huffington Post, Woody Harrelson rambles about weed, anti-vax conspiracy, and Saturday Night Live monologue. Variety even, Woody Harrelson, Saturday Night Live monologue makes COVID conspiracy jokes. So, again, interesting to see how these are being portrayed by media, especially those members of the corporate press, in relation to what Woody Harrelson had to say concerning COVID-19 and what he called all the drug cartels getting together with the media and forcing people to stay in their homes, and the only way they can come out is if they take their drugs over and over and over again. And we did have vaccine passports, and we were told the vaccines were going to save us all. And then we find out that the vaccines were not indeed something that prevented you from getting COVID. We found out that the vaccines were not as effective as they were. But if you question that, again, it goes back to the censorship that we all experienced over the past 3 years and the government colluding with social media and the big drug companies. And so is Woody Harrelson his joke that far off? Interesting to see all of that again and the headlines that have spread from it. So we'll be watching that space close.